I'm sure that, like myself, many of you have some of your earliest horror memories tied pretty tightly to a series of books that could not have cared less about freaking out little children who weren't even interested in reading them. If you're walking around the library as a kid, those Goosebumps covers aren't going to be too much to handle, but if you cross by Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark and you're not ready, it's either going to traumatize you for the foreseeable future or spark a lifelong obsession with spooky stuff. And here we are. You weren't supposed to be able to get those books until grade 6, but the librarian in my elementary school knew what was up and she let me take them long before then. They're much more macabre and dark than Goosebumps, to the point where they're listed as the most challenged book series of the 1990s in the American Library Association. That's pretty cool. Hell, those covers were so disturbing that when the books were reissued in 2011, Stephen Gammell's iconic artwork was replaced by new illustrations from Brett Hellquist. And while he's not a bad artist, and there's nothing against him, this is blasphemy of the highest order. You don't mess with perfection, and damn it, you need to let kids get scared by things. I remember being just scared like hell by the covers in the horror section at Blockbuster because the genius who decided the layout of the store near me made it so that you had to cross through the horror section to get to the kids' movies. And I don't mean genius sarcastically. I want to shake that person's hand and thank them. Anyway, the point is, I love Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark, and I deeply appreciate them for how they contributed to my early love for horror. And while Goosebumps went on one hell of a ride with the 90s TV series that, by the way, is available on YouTube in these God-sent 5-hour marathons of complete seasons, you're welcome. Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark didn't receive quite the same treatment, with only a short film adapting one of the stories being made in 2008, but all of that changed in 2019 when we finally got our first full-fledged film adaptation out of these wonderfully macabre stories. Now, I'm making this video for two reasons. One is that it's spooky month, and we need some good spooky month stuff to talk about, but the biggest reason I want to make this video is because it has been, what, 6 years now since we were left on this film's cliffhanger ending, and I want the people involved to know that there is still interest in seeing where it goes. This sequel has been pretty much radio silent for a long time, and I don't want them to lose momentum to the point where they think it's pointless, because I can tell you that, personally speaking, I really like this movie, and I want to see the story continued, so please don't abandon it. We'll get to the movie in a second, you know, we've been waiting to see what happens with Augie and Chuck for 6 years now, but I would imagine that a great mobile carrier could probably break through whatever metaphysical boundaries they're held back by, and that's why today's video is sponsored by Mint Mobile. I work from home, and I've been really annoyed by the fact that the only phone plans I'm able to find have mountains of data that I'll never use, and that's one of the annoyances that Mint Mobile can help you avoid. Their plans are super flexible and give you the ability to choose the amount of data that actually suits you so that you're not forced to overpay. They offer 5, 15, and 20 gigabyte plans, as well as an option for unlimited data if you want to make sure you can stream the entire Lord of the Rings trilogy in 4K without worrying. All of these plans include unlimited talk and text on the nation's largest 5G network, plus free calling to Mexico, Canada, and the UK. They've also made it super easy to switch over to their plans. You don't even need to leave the house. You can sign up and be ready to go in minutes by using an eSIM from the comfort of your home, so don't worry about having to deal with any headaches getting your carrier swapped. On top of all of that, Mint actually lets you buy your service in bulk, with 3, 6, and 12-month packages available, and the longer the duration, the more you save. All of their plans come with an unconditional 7-day money-back guarantee, so you can try it out if you're curious and not have to worry. Using the link below or by scanning the QR code on screen now, new customers can get their premium wireless plans that start at $15 a month. Thanks again to Mint Mobile for sponsoring this video. Let's get to some scary stories.
And as the legend goes, if you come to the Bellows house at dark and ask Sarah to tell you a story, it'll be the last story you ever hear.
So there were a couple of different ways that this movie could have gone, considering the book series isn't a continued storyline. Each book is a collection of stories, so they could have done an anthology with like 4 or 5 of the stories, but that's not how it played out. Although that would be pretty cool sometime, especially considering that the approach they took here meant that not every story is necessarily adapted faithfully. It's not just the stories themselves that I would have liked to see treated more faithfully, but we'll get to that. Instead of an anthology, this film tells you one story about a group of young friends who stumble on a book which writes stories in front of them, and those actually play out in the real world. The stories that it tells are either closely inspired by or directly recreate some of the ones from the original books, and I think in terms of trying to structure this in a way that would work, this isn't the worst idea. I do love the thought of a Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark anthology, but if we're not getting that, then what we have here could have been way worse, and it's largely helped by the fact that the core cast of characters is actually not bad. I'll talk more about them in a little bit, but I did want to mention that while this movie takes place in the 60s, it feels like they really wanted it to take place in the 80s, because for all intents and purposes, this is another movie that easily fits into the sort of Stranger Things vibe that is absolutely massive at the moment. It was even more prevalent in 2019. I say that because it's the most relevant piece of media using that format at the time, but Stranger Things was hardly the first story to do, the small town kids uncovering some creepy mystery. Like Stephen King's It also comes to mind. And the thing is, while I wouldn't blame anyone for being tired of this sort of thing by now, it's something that for me just never really gets old. These kinds of movies are like a warm, fuzzy blanket for me, so while it's not an original idea by any means, and absolutely feels like a lot of the creative decisions here were made to ride the wave of Stranger Things' popularity, it still mostly works. The movie winds up feeling like a more adult version of the old Family Channel horror movies I used to watch around Halloween as a kid, like Roxy Hunter and the Horrific Halloween or something like that. Amazing movie, by the way. Can't recommend it enough, and I want to find a DVD of it somewhere. There's gotta be one, right? Do they make those? Now here's the first spot where I find this movie runs into problems. I'm not entirely sure what the target age demographic for the movie was. Overall, it feels like something that would be absolutely perfect for someone who's getting old enough for some creepier horror, as opposed to, just pure kids movies. But then there's also some pretty crude stuff here, and there are a handful of moments that I genuinely think would be way too intense for a lot of the people who would be at that point. It's not like the movie is insanely gory or anything like that, but there's some pretty nasty stuff with moments like the scarecrow transformation or the red spot, and so in some ways to me it winds up feeling like the movie is sort of trapped in a demographic limbo. If it wasn't quite as intense as it gets at times, it would be easy to accept as something targeted at a younger audience and then forgive some of the stuff in the film that feels like a result of that. But with some of the things that happen, I don't find it easy to do that. I mean, this movie is dealing with child torture, dimensional kidnap, we've got dismembered limbs all over the place. One of our main characters is dealing with systemic racism and battling with the guilt he has for dodging the draft. Not only is the movie more intense than I think you'd expect to see out of something like this, it's also dealing with stuff that either wouldn't be remotely interesting to younger kids or would just go over their heads entirely. It's for that reason that I don't think the movie is meant necessarily for younger kids, but then if that's the case, I can't help but get kind of annoyed by how heavy-handed a lot of the movie is with its exposition. If we're targeting a demographic that's going to be chill with this kind of thing, then you don't need to be worried about us missing stuff if you don't spoon-feed it to us. Feels a bit like a situation of them wanting to have their cake and eat it too, but it's not the biggest issue at the end of the day. Those covers are so distinct and recognizable that it's a shame to see the movie feel like it's kind of just blending in with a lot of other stuff that's super similar tonally, especially when we've had to wait so long for a proper film adaptation of something from these books. We waited this long and then the movie doesn't even have the identity of the books. That does kind of suck. It feels like Goosebumps, and don't get me wrong, I'll never say that in an insulting way because I love how Goosebumps feels, but this isn't that, and it shouldn't be. I just can't help but imagine how insanely cool it would have been to have something with an artistic approach that felt more in line with the source material, instead of something that just pulls from those stories and then wraps them up in a package that, well, I don't mind it, does feel like something that we've just been inundated with over the past however many years. While I am a fan of this movie, we did miss out on something that could have had that Scary Stories identity, and that's a shame. I'm not holding my breath on this, but when that sequel eventually does come, I'd really love it if they went at it from a more tonally faithful angle and tried to incorporate more of the art style from the books. Go with something more raw and eerie and strange, and I think the movie would have done even better because it wouldn't feel as amalgamous. I think the big thing is that a lot of the movie just looks and feels too clean and commercial, which doesn't fit these stories, at least in the way I envision them. The one scene where I feel like we're approaching the sort of thing I'd hope for here is the morning after Tommy is attacked by Harold the Scarecrow. A desaturated cornfield covered in fog feels like something that would be used as a backdrop for one of the book covers, and if the production felt more gritty, then I think we'd have something amazing here. Actually, the shot of Harold in the maze is also pretty in line with what I'd hoped for, but I'll talk more about that in a moment. Now, that being said, if we're going to take this for what it is, then despite what I was just saying, the look and feel and the overall atmosphere in this movie is actually pretty damn great. Anyway, while I do wish it was more faithful to the tone of the books, the imagery in this movie isn't just serviceable for a Halloween season watch. There is some stuff in here that I think is genuinely amazing. It's a stylized movie with really exaggerated blue and sickly green tones for the lighting during the nighttime sequences. You've got lots of fog rolling around to really build up that atmosphere. But where I found they really nailed it was when it comes to the way they go about filming the entities throughout, like Harold, the Toe Story, the Pale Lady, the Jangly Man, and Sarah Bellows, who's an entirely new character created for the film. It's just super cool to see these characters that I remember being so scared of on those covers brought to life with so much attention and care, and while they're not all one-to-one, they're still really damn good. Harold doesn't have his big old belly, which upsets me, and while I could nitpick and say the face isn't quite right, this is really damn good. He winds up being the first of the stories that we see played with, where the bully character Tommy is told to bring some eggs to a neighbor and he gets attacked while in the cornfield. There are things that I really like about this sequence, but it also feels like they're falling into some more generic horror traps here that I think hurt the scene, particularly with the way they reveal Harold walking on his own after Tommy finds himself trapped in a sort of loop. They choose to do this with a jump scare and a big loud noise, which of course we see all the time, but I think the reason that it bothers me here is because they also had a shot that I think would have made for a perfect introduction to him and been way creepier, where we see him lumbering down the path towards Tommy. I just can't help but think about how fucking creepy it would have been for Tommy to be losing his way, look back down the path to try and orient himself, hear the sound of Harold walking, and then we could have gotten a nice wide shot of him coming around a bend with this really unnatural looking walk. Wouldn't even need music, wouldn't need a jump scare, it would be plenty creepy on its own. I'll touch on this more in a sec, but while what they did with the Pale Lady was a cool scene, I don't think it fit her character as much, and I think if they'd done something like that with Harold, instead, where every turn Tommy tries to make, Harold is down the path lumbering towards him, this scene would have been genuinely amazing, and then they could have done something more fitting with the Pale Lady. That being said, what really works about this sequence outside of Harold's design is what happens to Tommy at the end here, where he's basically cursed to become a scarecrow himself, and this sequence is fucking horrifying. It looks extremely painful to have straw poking out of his skin like this, coming out from under his fingernails, and eventually his eyes and nose, and he's choking on the stuff in his throat trying to pull it, but he can't keep up with it. It's actually pretty damn disturbing, especially since this is happening to a high schooler.
Eat shit, Harold.
We have the zombie lady looking to get her big toe back, which is a story that's fairly loosely adapted since it's not happening during a family dinner or anything, but instead just to Augie, who's home alone. I think in terms of the way the stories in this movie are handled, I like the way they build this one up the most. You've got Augie talking to his mom on the phone and mentioning a stew in the fridge that she says she didn't make, which is a really nice detail, but then it's just the creeping silence after Augie gets a panic call from his friends about his story being written, where he's listening for the sounds of what they're talking about and gets really freaked out when they come. Just a great, eerie build-up, and it pays off well with a super faithful recreation of the zombie lady before Augie gets taken away. And then for what's easily the closest we get to a one-to-one recreation of these entities was the Pale Lady. I kind of liked her more ominous presence in the original story more instead of her attacking Chuck here. Like, her design is so uncanny and creepy that I think it works best when it's something just sort of lingering around and acting as a sort of omen instead of being outwardly antagonistic, but I still really like the scene of her attacking him with the way they made it feel so inescapable with every turn that Chuck tries to make. That eternal unsettling grin is just fantastic, but again, I do wonder if something along these lines would have worked better as a part of Harold's story, so they could have let the Pale Lady lean more into the creepy omen thing that I think more closely fits what makes her uncanny design so effective. The Jangly Man is sort of like an amalgamation of a couple different stories, taking some design inspiration from the depiction of Aaron Kelly, a dead man who returned to his home after being buried and not accepting that he has died, and two stories where body parts fall out of a chimney, one being Me Tai Do Ti Walker, which we hear the Jangly Man exclaiming over and over again in the movie.
Me, Taidochi Walker.
It's never explained if that actually means anything. And in the movie, it has even less meaning than it did in the original story, since it was like a call and response there where the thing would say, me, Taidochi Walker, and then this guy's dog would answer it. So, but here it's just a one-way thing. Still cool to see though. And then we also have What Do You Come For, which is a story about a woman who lives alone and calls out for some company, and a bunch of body parts fall out of a chimney to form a body. It's creepy shit. I suppose for a character that was designed to be a bunch of improperly connected body parts and a monstrosity of anatomy, it makes sense to take bits and pieces from various stories and turn them into one awful creature. My main issue with this one is sort of a symptom of the movie wanting to take these creatures that were designed in the context of very contained stories and then apply them onto something completely new. Each of these creatures is basically reading the fears of their victim, and the jangly man winds up going after Ramon, who again is trying to grapple with his guilt for dodging the draft, and the other ones weren't particularly fleshed out fears or anything, with Harold and the Pale Lady mostly just being really creepy and sourcing from normal fears. The Toe Lady was a little better in that, right, since Augie is like a paranoid hypochondriac, so having him face down a stew with body parts is a good idea, but the jangly man doesn't really feel like it plays into Ramon's fears in any way. Like, there's no part of the creature itself that plays into his guilt, aside from it just like saying shit to him about it, which I think is a shame. They could have literally anything do this and just talking shit, and then they're like, that's how it's tied in. Like, imagine if there had been some horrifying monster that was a fellow soldier-to-be who's been horribly killed in a way that wouldn't have happened if Ramon had been there. That would have been a cool way to try and have this creature actually embody the fear that it's targeting. But because the movie was adapting the book series without sticking to what these creatures were designed around, you get this sort of like forced connection to the character's fears that winds up feeling like a distraction. It's just sort of messy because of the way they go about doing things. That brings us to Sarah Bellows, the ghost at the center of the story who brings about this whole ordeal when the kids sneak into her abandoned haunted house in the middle of the night and take with them a book, asking the question that is rumored to bring about her curse.
Sarah Bellows, tell me a story.
Now, as I mentioned earlier, Sarah Bellows is a new character who's not from the books, but her story is actually largely inspired by one from the books called Sounds, which includes a rich family and a mentally ill daughter having vanished from a house that would go on to then be haunted, which is much like what we see here. While I'm not a fan of how all the source material is treated, it is cool to see that it was clearly made by people who cared about it, and that goes a really long way. I enjoyed what they did with her story, but what I really loved about Sarah Bellows was the way they went about handling her on-screen presence during the film's climax, which is just, it's right up my alley in how I like to see ghosts handled for something like this. She's fading between skeletal and human, strange and vaguely shaped and feeling like part of the shadow around her. It's just really fucking awesome. Yeah, the tone they're able to build up in the movie is just really great, and for something in spooky season, all of these different creature designs fit just perfectly. There are a couple of moments where I feel like they could have let silence speak more freely, like that bit with Harold that I mentioned, and also with one scene where they're bringing a music box to someone who used to live in the house and was the daughter of the shitty family's live-in maid, and so she's hearing this music box for the first time in a very long while, and instead of letting the metallic, eerie ring of the box be the only music here, they just keep pumping the score into the scene, and I found it just made things feel messy. That being said, the fall vibes for the rest of her house are absolutely on point, so there's some give and take there. Speaking of score, it's decent. I really love the slower and more eerie piano music, but when things crank up and we're dealing with some of the more energetic stuff, it's unfortunately just a pretty generic horror score. I think something creepier and more ominous would have served the film a lot better, but there's still some stuff here that I did really like. It's also worth noting that in a lot of ways, this kind of story really lives or dies on whether or not that central cast of kids is fun to hang around with, and I actually do like these guys quite a bit. There were a couple of moments that got a little chuckle out of me between them, and while none of them are particularly fleshed out characters, it's the group dynamic that makes it really work. Stella and Ramon are the most developed, with Ramon having to deal with racism from the cops and his draft dodging, and Stella trying to grapple with her mother leaving her and her dad when she was younger and feeling guilty about it. Her dad is played by Dean Norris, which is pretty damn cool. I just think the movie was maybe trying to cram too many things into the movie, and I didn't think it had time to flesh them out all that much. So a lot of things, including Stella's father, feel really peripheral, and you kind of just forget they're going on until the movie cuts back to them for a bit. Their phone call towards the end of the movie was actually pretty emotionally effective, but it's not an overly impactful side plot overall, and one that honestly wouldn't change the movie all that much if it were cut. It's the focus where I feel like this movie really runs into problems. Like, they wanted to adapt scary stories to tell in the dark, but they want to do it in their own stories. So you wind up with portrayals of the iconic characters that look really great, but feel like they're being shoehorned into roles in a story they were never designed for, so they're just awkwardly shoved into places and loosely tied into the narrative. And you have the side plot of Ramon dealing with the racist cop and trying to come to terms with his secret that he's keeping. You have Stella dealing with the situation with her mother and her father, who's not been doing well since then. You have Ruth, Augie's sister, who was messing around with Tommy before things got bad, and she winds up getting really messed up by what happened to her. There's the whole Sarah Bellows thing, which itself has its own twists and turns. And then on top of that, you have the movie trying to ride the Stranger Things wave while taking place in the 60s and not really landing on that tone because of the more generic string-centric horror score, trying to hold on to some of the identity of the books but cram it into a package that it doesn't fit in. The movie just, it's a little overstuffed with a whole lot of ideas that never get fully realized. I think that if they had narrowed the focus of things, we'd be in a much better position. Now, all of that being said, that doesn't change the fact that this movie is like a long episode of Goosebumps with more of an edge to it. And I'm not gonna sit here with some analytical lens and pretend that I don't really enjoy this movie. This is my second copy of it I bought. I had the standard Blu-ray and I was like, no, I'm upgrading to the 4K. I like this thing. It's just fun, man, despite all of its problems. And when it really comes down to it, that's what matters. It's a good, vibey, small-town mystery horror movie to throw on in October, and it's one that I have not missed in my marathon since it came out because of how well it fits in this time of year. I get to see a bunch of horror characters from my early love of the genre brought to life on screen with a fun story and a good cast of characters and a good look and feel, and it's, you know, it's perfectly serviceable and genuinely really great in a lot of ways. Perfectly serviceable. I promise that I'm making it sound worse than it is. Serviceable is a good thing. It's good. That means it works. It does what it's supposed to do. I think the focus and identity were really the biggest issues here. But like I said, I damn well want to see that sequel because Chuck and Augie are still stuck in some demon dimension and I want to know where they are. So yeah, like, please still make that movie. Thanks for watching through to the end. I hope you enjoyed the video enough that you want to see more, and if that's the case, consider subscribing and hitting the notification bell because YouTube can sometimes suck at recommending channels. A huge thank you to my wonderful Patreon supporters and YouTube channel members who are a massive help in allowing me to continue committing as much time as I can to making these videos. If you want to gain access to things like behind the scenes material or gain early access to my videos, consider supporting me on either platform. As always, thank you for stopping by Rocklin Graves. I hope you've enjoyed your stay.